Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the British Columbia Museums Association webinar. My name is Lorinda Calvert, and I will be your host for today. Today's webinar topic is an introduction to BC Arts Council funding for museums and Indigenous cultural centers. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that the BCMA offices are located on the traditional lands of the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations. We are grateful for the opportunity to live and learn here in mutual respect and appreciation. We also recognize the traditional lands of the many nations across British Columbia where the work of the projects described in these webinars have been carried out. As I mentioned, I'm Lorinda Calvert, your host for today. I am also the BCMA's programs coordinator. My pronouns are she, her. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you're experiencing any technical difficulties, please do email our office. Vanessa, our operations manager, is assisting or standing by to assist, and her email address is on the slide there. Small bit of housekeeping before we begin. Please use the chat feature to ask questions or make comments. I will read your comments or questions out to our host. There'll be some time at the end of the presentation reserved for Q&A, and we ask that you use the chat feature. If you are unsure of how to use the chat feature, just hover your mouse on the bottom or top of your screen. The taskbar might be hidden, and there's a little icon that says chat, and that's the one you click where you can type your question in. This month's presenter is Anissa Paulsen from the BC Arts Council. And Anissa, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Lorinda. It's great to be back at the BCMA in a webinar on the other side. So thank you so much for this opportunity to share our funding programs with your members.
Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, no problem. It is, I've always felt it's definitely quite awkward to not see people, but I'm still opting to not use the video, so I apologize for that. But I am waving at everybody, and I'm very pleased to have this connection with the BCMA members once again. So I'm just going to share my screen momentarily. Let's see. Okay. So before we begin, oops, I would also like to acknowledge that the BC Arts Council carries out its work on the land of Indigenous nations all throughout British Columbia, and our main offices are located on the ancestral lands of the Lekwungen people, also known as the Esquimalt and Songhees First Nations communities. As a council, we pay our respects to the elders, past and present, descendants and custodians of these lands, and we honor the knowledge keepers and the continuing relationships with Indigenous peoples in BC that develop through our work together. Again, my name is Anissa Paulsen, and I am a settler to the ancestral lands of the Lekwungen peoples, and I am grateful to be able to work, play, and learn here on these beautiful lands. I also use the pronouns she and her. As some of you may be aware, I previously worked at the BC Museums Association, and since January of this year, I joined the team at the BC Arts Council, where I continue to support the arts through their funding programs. My current portfolio at the BC Arts Council includes the scholarship program, which covers 7 different disciplines, and annually over 350 applications from students pursuing full-time studies in the arts. I also co-manage the Youth Engagement Program, as well as the Museums and Indigenous Cultural Center operating and project clients that we have. Although I've been at this job for, I guess, 8 months now, I'm still feeling like quite a newbie. So preparing this presentation was a good exercise for me, and I hope that I'll be able to share with you some important information about the funding opportunities that the BC Arts Council has for BC's museums. There will be a time at the end of this webinar to ask questions, but feel free, like Lorinda mentioned, to type them into the chat as we go along, and I think Lorinda will be reading those out to me at the end. You are always also very welcome to connect with me at a later date beyond this webinar. I will be very happy to answer questions you have or just to say hello. Okay. I thought it might be helpful to provide you with a quick picture of the context in which the BC Arts Council operates. The Arts Council is housed within the Ministry of Tourism, Arts and Culture, and the BC Arts Council staff are therefore government employees. The Honorable Lisa Baer is the minister responsible for tourism, arts and culture, and Shauna Brower is her deputy minister. who is the chief civil servant in the ministry. The minister is ultimately responsible and accountable to government for the operations and performance of the BC Arts Council, and in particular for ensuring that the organization is fulfilling its mandate commitments while aligning with the broader provincial government policy objectives. However, the ministry staff also supports the BC Arts Council board, which is in the orange box there, and the priorities set out in our strategic plan, which we will discuss shortly. The work of the BC Arts Council staff is varied and includes day-to-day operations and administration of our funding programs, regular client interaction and general support for the sector, program development, implementation and review, and budget monitoring and financial administration. A mandate letter is delivered by the Premier to each minister serving in their cabinet, and it outlines the minister's core responsibilities or commitments in alignment with the government's priorities. The latest mandate letter was dated July 18th, 2017, and it has 8 commitments for a minister, and these significantly inform the work of the BC Arts Council, either directly or indirectly. Currently, there are 3 of them that relate directly to the work of the BC Arts Council, including a mandate commitment to double the province's investment in the BC Arts Council over 4 years. And I'm happy to report that since 2017-18, there has been an additional 11 million invested in the BC Arts Council, but we're not quite at the doubling mark yet. Another commitment is to establish an arts infrastructure fund to help provide space for BC artists and cultural practitioners. And that program is live now with a deadline of October 19th. So we're very excited that that program has launched. In addition, the letter outlines the province's commitment to true and lasting reconciliation with First Nations in British Columbia. And this includes, but is certainly not limited to, the commitment to principles of the calls to action of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People. And in one of 4 of the BC Arts Council strategic priorities is Indigenous arts and culture, where we commit to decolonizing our approach to funding, taking our lead from Indigenous artists, organizations, and communities, and where we are respecting the principle of self-determination. The BC Arts Council was established in 1995 through the Arts Council Act, and we are a public sector agency of the provincial government for the purposes of providing support for the arts and culture in British Columbia, providing persons and organizations with the opportunity to participate in arts and culture in British Columbia, and providing an open, accountable, and neutrally administered process for managing funds for British Columbia arts and culture. The Act also provides for up to 15 members on a board to act as advisors and offer high-level oversight over the BC Arts Council's activities. And appointed by an order in council, the members of this board are accountable to the people of British Columbia through the legislature, and they collectively represent or reflect the province's regional and diverse populations and the spectrum arts and cultural communities, either through discipline expertise or regular engagement in the arts or arts administration. And our current BC Arts Council Chair is Susan Jackson. This slide illustrates some of the key features of our strategic plan, and our strategic plan is available on our website if you want to check it out in detail, and if you haven't already done so. But in July 2018, the BC Arts Council released New Foundations, the strategic plan for 2018 to 2022, which articulates the following vision that's written out there on that slide. That artists and cultural organizations in British Columbia are well supported, thriving, and able to reach their full potential under principles of equity, diversity, accessibility, and reconciliation. Arts and culture are seen as fundamental to developing vibrant and resilient communities, where the people of British Columbia are highly engaged in the province's unique arts and culture sector, recognized for its innovation and leadership in Canada and abroad. So the strategic plan intends to facilitate more equitable access to arts funding and decolonize many of our programs and practices by focusing on 4 strategic directions. And those directions include sustainability and creative development. So the BC Arts Council commits to building on our programs, bolstering support in much needed funding areas, to ensure that a diversity of artists and organizations are resilient, relevant, and well supported to build capacity and create. Also, we commit to Indigenous arts and culture to deepen our engagement with the processes of decolonization and reconciliation, taking our lead from Indigenous artists, organizations, and communities, and respecting the principle of self-determination. Equity, diversity, and access is another strategic direction, and we commit to improving access to our programs, building principles of equity throughout the organization at every level to better support meaningful and genuine forms of diversity. And we will do this through collaboration and co-creation with underserved communities. And then last but certainly not least, the fourth strategic direction is regional arts and community arts, where we focus on the diversity of both professional and community arts. Again, the plan is available on our website, bcartscouncil.ca, if you are interested in looking at it in all its details. There are a few strategic plan highlights that I'd like to mention today. Basically, over the course of the past 2 years since the plan has been announced, the BC Arts Council has increased annual funding to over 300 arts organizations in all parts of the province. We have increased our average grant size for individual artists by over $2,000, nearly doubled the investment in community arts practice and festivals. We have also developed a draft equity framework with an equity consultant, and that work will be announced in a more public and formal way in the months to come, so keep an eye out for that. We have also launched a new website and an online granting system, and we have a social media presence. So be sure to follow us on Facebook and Twitter so you can keep up to date with the latest program announcements. So the BC Arts Council, as I'm sure many of you are aware, has a variety of funding programs available to museums, Indigenous cultural centers, as well as arts and curatorial collectives and individual museum professionals. I'll give you a brief overview of the programs, but please be sure to consult our website for more information, as the program guidelines are updated each year and the deadlines, not all of the programs that I'm going to mention today are open at the moment. So the first bullet there is our project assistance funding program, which supports the development and creation of high quality artistic, cultural, and or human cultural history programming. And I will go into more details about this particular funding program because there have been some recent changes to the eligibility criteria, and it is also the program most relevant to the sector at the moment because it's currently open for intake with a deadline of October 15th this year. Obviously, this year, 2020. The second bullet there is another program that I mentioned earlier, the Arts Infrastructure Program. It's a new funding program at the BC Arts Council, just announced a few weeks ago, and the deadline for this program is October 19th. So this program enables eligible organizations to develop and enhance spaces that support the work of BC's arts and cultural practitioners. And funding is available in two categories. One is capital improvements, which are building-based projects involving the purchase, construction, renovation, or expansion of an arts or cultural facility. And eligible organizations may request assistance from this program up to $75,000. The second component to the Arts Infrastructure Program is specialized equipment acquisition. And projects under this category can focus on the purchase of specialized equipment for long-term use and associated installation expenses. And any requests for this category can be up to $40,000. So again, I would encourage you to check out our website if you're interested in this funding program because the guidelines are stated in full there. There are details around the matching portion that is also required within this funding program. Early career development, the third program on the bullet list there. The deadline has recently closed, but in general, this program assists early career arts practitioners in developing their practice while building their career experience. And the program supports the development of knowledge and capacity within the sector and helps create opportunities for the next generation of artists and arts practitioners. Assistance through this program is available to both arts and cultural organizations, as well as individuals and collectives. And you can apply, arts and cultural organizations can apply for an internship to host an early career practitioner in a paid internship. And they can also apply for a cohort, which is the opportunity for an arts and cultural organization to host a group of early career practitioners in paid professional development positions. And then for individual art practitioners or collectives, you can apply for a residency within an arts and cultural organization or a mentorship within as well, for an individual to develop a one-on-one learning opportunity with an established practitioner working in their field or in their art form or discipline. The co-op placements program assists arts and cultural organizations to hire students for professional work experience through co-op placement and work integrated learning programs. The deadline is December 15th each year, and we anticipate the guidelines to be available on our website around the end of October or beginning of November. Then there's the youth engagement program that is also often many museums apply to. And this program supports eligible organizations that take innovative and inspiring approaches to engaging British Columbia's young people. And the focus of this program is to engage youth with professional artists and arts and culture programming. And for the purposes of this program, we currently define youth as being under the age of 24. Eligible projects could include research, development, implementation, or presentation of pilot projects and new programs, as well as enhancements or expansion of existing programs. And projects can be up to 2 years in duration. And again, this program will open at the end of November likely, or the beginning of December, and the deadline is always January 15th. The BC Arts Council also has an operating assistance program, and this supports the public program activities of BC's professional, not-for-profit public museums and Indigenous cultural centers. And in order to be eligible for the operating assistance program, an organization must first successfully complete 2 project grants, which I'll be talking about a little bit later. And once an eligible organization has completed the 2 project grants, then they can apply to operating assistance. An entrance into the operating assistance program is not guaranteed, unfortunately, at that point. The organization must still write a competitive application that will be assessed by the Museums and Indigenous Cultural Centers Advisory Panel. And then depending on the year's budget that we have available to us at that particular intake, the panel will determine if the organization will be accepted into operating assistance. And last but certainly not least, for individuals and curatorial collectives, there are professional development grants. And in the interest of time, I would recommend that you check out our website for details about this and all the other funding programs. But feel free to contact me or any other program officer responsible for this specific program if you have any questions. I do know the professional development grant has sometimes been used to support participation in conferences. So keep that in mind for the days when we will be able to meet in person again at a conference. Okay, so I'm going to focus my talk now on the project assistance funding program that is specific to museums and Indigenous cultural centers and is currently open for applications. So I'm particularly excited to announce the opening of this funding program this year because there has been an update to our eligibility criteria. In the past, there has been an exclusion of single-themed museums, which has prevented museums such as the Maritime Museum, Rail Museum, or the Costume Museum from applying. So over the past year, we have listened to feedback from the sector and sought advice from our museums and Indigenous Cultural Centers Advisory Committee. And this year we are delighted to announce that the single themed exclusion has been removed. So single theme museums, excuse me, are now eligible to apply to this program. Excuse me there. So this funding program opened just last week. Well, actually, I think just on Thursday. And the submission deadline is October 15th. So approximately 5 weeks from today. So regardless of whether or not you are a single theme museum or general community museum or any other kind of museum, I do hope that you will consider applying to this funding program. It is open to Indigenous cultural centers and arts and curatorial collectives as well. Our project assistance program supports the development and creation of high quality artistic, cultural, and human cultural history programming. And this includes a wide variety of projects like exhibitions, artist residencies, exploration of new curatorial practices, community engagement, as well as collections management projects. So the basic eligibility includes that you must be a nonprofit based in British Columbia. You must have been operating for at least 1 year. That you compensate artists and practitioners fairly within the context of your project. So this idea of compensation may vary from community context to community context. So just within your application, be sure that you clearly establish what you are paying your guest curators, for example, or any other guest artists who are involved with the project, and make sure that it is a fair wage. There is a CARFAC fee schedule that is sometimes helpful for knowing how to pay artists who are working with you in developing exhibitions, but sometimes that might not be appropriate for your community context. So just make sure that you provide enough information within your application for the assessment panel to understand how you're compensating the people involved with your project. And another eligibility bullet there is that the project assistance program is not available to organizations who are already receiving operating assistance from the BC Arts Council. There are a few other exclusions in place that are still there, unfortunately. And these are stated in the guidelines, but this funding program is not available for organizations dedicated to archives only. And it is also not available for archaeological or heritage sites or historic places. And it is also not available for museums that do not hold a permanent collection. So again, I just ask that you do read through the full guidelines posted on our website. If there are any further questions about eligibility, please ask at the end of this presentation or give me a call and we can discuss. And I think, excuse me, the biggest thing to point out about the expansion of the new eligibility criteria is that just because an organization may now be eligible, it does not guarantee success in the program. As I'm sure you all are aware, the BC Arts Council funding programs are highly competitive. So it still requires a strong application that presents a solid project that fits within the BC Arts Council strategic priorities, as well as the specific assessment criteria as outlined in the guidelines. So once you've confirmed that you are eligible, how do you apply? If you haven't already applied for a program, we do have a new online system, and all new applicants must first create an application profile and register in our online system. And we require this registration, excuse me, before you can submit an application, or before you even have access to the applications, you have to register. So you can register by going to the URL that's at the top of this slide. And there are step-by-step instructions on the registration process outlined on our website at this link. It can take up to 4 days for an application to be, or for a registration to be approved by our administrative staff. So if you're just thinking at all about applying, I would just recommend that you go through the registration process now so that you're not stressed about it later on when it gets closer to the deadline. There's no harm in being registered and not applying. It actually is really good because you will be getting notifications when other funding programs do open up. So when you are registered and when you're ready to apply, the application can be found through the online system, and you must submit a fully completed application, including all requested information and support materials. And again, this is outlined in the guidelines. Specific to this project grant, the online application must include your details outlining the proposed project, including a project timeline or work plan. You will also be asked to include a summary of your organization's history of development, creation, production, and/or dissemination of your discipline in British Columbia. So basically that just means your activities as a museum over the past couple of years, and focusing on any of your activities that may be particularly relevant to the project you are proposing in your application. You will also be asked to include a biography for each member of your project's team. And these are just short biographies of 250 words each. And you will also be asked for a balanced project budget using the budget table that is built within the online application. And you can provide notes to the budget section within the budget section to indicate whether revenues are confirmed or pending, which is really useful information for our assessment panel when they're reviewing applications. And you will also be asked for an operating budget for the fiscal year in which your proposed project takes place, and letters from partners or collaborators, if applicable, confirming the nature of their participation. For new applicants who have not previously received funding through this program, you will also be asked to supply 2 letters of reference from established arts and cultural practitioners familiar with your organization's work. So this can be from any fellow professional museum workers who are familiar or may have been involved with a project or an exhibit that you've done in the past, or a publication or something like that. They don't have to be excruciatingly long, but just 2 letters of reference, again, so that the assessment panel can understand how your museum is positioned within the broader context of the provincial sector. Okay, so as you prepare your application, it's crucial that you are also aware of the assessment criteria through which your application will be considered. And understanding these criteria will help you better frame the answers to your question to make the job of the assessors easier to review and assess your application. So the 3 assessment criteria specific to the project funding program. The first one is artistic contribution and significance, which is weighted at 40%. And the assessment panel will evaluate your proposed project's overall artistic achievement by considering the strength of your vision of the project, the quality of the proposed activities, the integrity of the creative processes, including your approaches to research and interpretation, also the contributors that you have involved, as well as the cultural context and protocols that you will be using to embark upon your project. Your application will also be assessed on engagement and impact at 30%. And the assessment panel will evaluate your engagement with and your impact on not only the province's arts and cultural community, but also your organization's own identified communities. And this will be considered, the impact will be considered within the context of effective audience development, visitor outreach, and community engagement strategies and educational programming that you may describe in your application. Well, this area also takes into consideration the ability to engage and sustainably benefit historically underserved communities and their artistic practices, including meaningful engagement with diverse demographics, accessibility of space and content, and reconciliation. And then finally, your proposed project and application will be assessed on the feasibility criteria, which is weighted at 30%. And in general, the assessment panel will evaluate the viability of the project and consider the budget you have in place, the work plan, the resource allocation, the role of your artistic leadership, as well as the rigor of human resources practices built in with your application. So again, in relation to providing fair remuneration and compensation, the cultural competency category will also, or considerations will also be taken into consideration, cultural safety and making sure that organizations operate in a safe and respectful work environment. So that is a lot of information. And again, this is all outlined in detail within our guidelines that are posted on our website. For those of you who are not already aware, I just want to take a few moments to explain the assessment process at the BC Arts Council, so you know what happens to your application after it has been submitted. And first of all, the program officer reviews all submitted applications to ensure that the applications meet the minimum standards for review and that have all the supporting materials attached. Then we hand the applications over to the peer assessment panel. And the peer assessment process is what supports the distribution of grants, and it's fundamental to the work of the BC Arts Council. You know, we take our peer assessment panels very seriously, and because it allows for an open, accountable, and transparent decision-making process for our agency. And it also supports artistic expression of applicants and the exchange of artistic knowledge and experience. So we gather a panel of 3 to 5 artists or arts and cultural practitioners or museum professionals and Indigenous cultural center professionals to review the applications. And then that group together has a discussion and considers which applications best demonstrate merit against the assessment criteria that I described earlier. And then finally, that group of your peers determines the final distribution of the awards. And it's important to know that when we consider assessors for a panel, the staff at the BC Arts Council looks for a mix of broad professional knowledge and experience, as well as geographical representation, as well as varied institutional and cultural viewpoints, including those from Indigenous perspectives. So this slide has our statistics from last fiscal year that we engaged over 200 assessors on 40 different panels who assessed over 3,000 applications, which distributed 1,885 awards in total. The success rate you see there is 57%, and that actually is quite high because it takes into consideration all of our program areas, including operating, which once you're in operating, you are guaranteed your funding year after year. So that success rate is a little bit skewed when you're considering a specific program area like the project assistance for museums and Indigenous cultural centers like I'm describing. That success rate is closer to 25 to 35% success rate. Just a final note is that with the application deadline of October 15th, we strive to send out our notification and award letters no later than 16 weeks after the submission deadline. So I've actually failed to calculate ahead on what that date is, but October, I think around the beginning of February. So that wraps up my long monologue. I apologize for it being so non-interactive, but I look forward to questions from any of you now, if there are any.
Thank you so much, Anissa. I'm just going to take over the screen just to pop up our question screen one more time.
Sure.
Just reminding folks, if you have a question, please feel free to use the chat function. If you want to hover your mouse at the top or the bottom of your screen, you should be able to see the chat icon where you can type in there. Oh, and I see some coming in already. Anissa, a question here. Is the professional development funding available to collections and conservation professionals working in museums, or is this only open to curatorial staff?
No, yes, it would be available to museum professionals in general, not necessarily just the curatorial staff, yes.
Thank you. We have another good question here, which is asking if there will be a webinar similar to this for the arts and culture organizations, which is a wonderful question. And I will make note of that as I'm always looking for suggestions for more webinars. And a question here, Anissa, how can someone apply to be on a peer review panel?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, and I'm sorry I didn't mention that. Feel free to send me an email directly if you're interested, but also there is well, I would encourage you to do that in general, just so I know that you're interested and I can kind of keep your name in the back of my head. But also on the website, and when you register in the online system, and forgive me, we haven't yet come up with a catchy name for the online system, but when you have registered in the online system, I believe there is a question that actually comes up to prompt you to indicate whether or not you're interested in being a peer assessor. So you can tick that box and then explain where your areas of expertise are, and then we keep that database as well. As well on our website, there is more information about what it means to be a peer assessor, and the time commitment involved. But yeah, we definitely welcome people to join us in that very important part of the process. It also is a great learning opportunity. I mean, for anybody who is writing a grant, or you just get to see the back end of it and understand, like, well, what kind of discussions are the assessment group is having when they're reviewing applications. So it gives you a lot of good information and context for preparing your own grant applications as well.
Thank you. A question here, what if your organization is 100% volunteer? How does that apply to the fair wage clause?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it's a problem if you are, well, let me see how I can phrase this. Specific to the project assistance funding program, we want to support programs and projects that do pay their staff, so pay the people involved with the project. So if you are a volunteer organization and you're engaging people from the community to help you build an exhibition, for example, we will want to see that you are paying the people from your community appropriately. You don't necessarily have, just because you're not paying your staff doesn't mean you suddenly have to be paid for this project, but it's more about who you're involving within the project and then making sure that they are being paid appropriately.
Thank you. Another question here.
I'm just going to add.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
In terms of the compensation piece, because it is difficult for volunteer organizations. If you are interested in becoming a part of our operating assistance funding stream, at that point, we do require that the staff is paid professional wages. So all volunteer organizations are not eligible for the operating, just to make that point there.
Thank you. Another question we have here, this person is wondering if the Arts Infrastructure Program is open to organizations who receive operations assistance.
Yes, I believe it is.
Awesome. Another question here, should we discuss our project details with you or another BCAC staff before applying?
Yes, definitely talk about them with me. Feel free to give me a call or send me an email. We can set up a time to chat about your project. Um, and I can give you some context of, what kind of projects are more competitive than others. And as well, I definitely recommend that you ask somebody who's not familiar with your organization to read over your project or your application as you're writing it, because often that outside perspective is a really good one to have when you're creating your narrative within your application. What may seem obvious to you may not be obvious to the peer assessment panel, for example. So if you build in time when you're working on your application to have somebody else read it and critique it, I think that will also help make your application stronger before you submit it.
Thank you. And a question here, for accessing operating funds, once having completed 2 successful projects, what kind of staffing is required to receive funding?
What kind of staffing, as in like permanent staff? I think maybe that question.
Maybe.
Yeah, I don't think it's a cut and dry calculation. So I think if whoever is asking that question, I would just ask them to please reach out to me directly, and we can discuss your organization's context. It may be something that you'd want to build up to if you don't have, if you're an all-volunteer organization, for example, and you're wanting to build up to a paid staff. I think currently we have organizations that are receiving operating assistance that have only 2 paid staff. Actually, maybe 1.5, I think, the way their FTEs work out. So you don't have to have a whole huge team of collections managers and curatorial and education programmers. We just want to make sure that you're upholding the standards of a professional museum. So again, I invite you to reach out to me directly and we can talk about your particular context.
Thank you. I haven't seen any more questions come in to our chat. Did you have more slides past your question slide that you wanted to share? Because I could stop sharing if you wanted to pop back on.
Yeah, it was just my contact information.
Sure. Here, I'll stop sharing if you want to throw that up, and then I'll take over.
Sure. Let's see. Oops. There you go. Just a thank you slide. Thank you everybody for your attention and for your great questions. And if you do have further questions, and especially as you're working on your application or if you're reviewing the guidelines, feel free to reach out at any point and I'd be happy to talk with you specifically about your proposed project or your organization.
Thank you so much. Someone's saying thank you so much in the chat. That's wonderful. I know you just threw your thank you up, but I'm going to take over your screen again, Anissa, just for our little end bit. But thank you so much for joining and for sharing your contact information. I'm sure you'll be getting quite a few questions following this webinar. Thank you so much, Anissa, for joining us. Thank you for all our participants for joining us today. We really appreciate it. I hope you found this webinar valuable. Please consider joining us in October. We've got some more webinars coming up. On October 14th, we are exploring online resources and looking into digital exhibits and collection stewardship. On October 21st, we're measuring what matters and tracking data and measuring impact at your Cultural Heritage Institute. If you have any suggestions for topics in 2020 or wish to present one yourself, you can email me at programs@museumsassn.bc.ca, and there'll be a survey that will show up in your inbox soon. By filling that out, it gives us information on what kind of webinars you're looking for and feedback so we can improve our webinars and serve you better. And do consider joining us in 2020 and beyond by becoming a member of the BCMA. By becoming a member, you have access to funding opportunities, free webinar participation, reduced registration fees, access to professional development opportunities and resources, and so much more. Thank you again, Anissa, for joining us, and for all of our participants. Hope you have a wonderful afternoon.
Yeah, you're welcome, Lorinda. And I was just going to say, I was going to prepare a handout that lists all of those funding opportunities that are available to museums and Indigenous cultural centers, as well as a handout on the top 10 mistakes to avoid when applying for grants. So I will send those to Lorinda, and then she can send those out to the registered webinar participants today.
Thank you so much, Anissa. That'd be wonderful. And yes, for everyone listening, if you registered for this webinar, you'll get an email in your inbox with a recording of this webinar, and I will attach Anissa's resources to that email as well.
Great, thank you.
Thanks so much. Take care.